What's going on today, guys? Anthony here with Empire Music. I'm going to talk a little bit about bass today. We're going to talk about active basses versus passive basses. What's right for you? What's better or worse in general? Hint, there isn't really an answer there. It all really depends on what you like and what style of music you're playing and what you want to get out of your instrument. And just kind of dissect what that means. There's a lot of videos out there on the internet, but this is kind of our take on it here in the store, or my take on it since I'm kind of the resident bass guy here. If you came into the store, what I want to kind of get out of you from an informational standpoint and find out what style of music you're playing and what you want to get out of the instrument. Very important that we're providing our customers with, the best instrument for them, regardless of price point. We want to know what features are going to really help, to improve your playing and to make to make your life a little bit easier and give you, what you need out of an instrument. So first off, passive bass, that's the original. That's the way it was originally designed. I have in my hand here a postmodern Fender Custom Shop P bass with a J neck on it. We're not going to get too far into the specs because that's really not what this is about. But we're going to get into what happens here. So you have a tone knob, you have a volume knob here, you have a tone knob here. The way a passive bass works, you don't need any additional power in order to get any type of tone sculpting out of it. You're just going to do it with the tone knob. When you roll that back, basically there's capacitors in here in the wiring that cut out certain frequencies of the instrument, thus giving it kind of like a muted kind of tone or a brighter tone. For a quick example of it, it would sound like this. So with the tone knob all the way up, with the tone knob all the way back, and then somewhere in the middle, my sweet spot's always going to be about 80 to 75. So I would probably play that around here, hopefully. And that always gives me kind of what I want to get out of it. You get that little bit of top end if you dig, you get a little bit of warmth if you don't. Everything seems to be represented in the frequency spectrum where I like it. The next person might like it on full bore, the next person might like it all the way off. So it really, really depends on what you want to get out of the instrument. So a dead simple operation in a passive bass. That's more of the vintage inspired kind of school of thought. You know what you're going to get out of it. There's really you can't over tweak it. So passive basses are great for that reason. Next, I'm going to show you how an active bass works on it and why it is what it is. So let me unplug this and give me 1 sec here. Okay, so now in my hands is a Deluxe active bass. This is a 5-string. It's a jazz bass, 2 J pickups in it. So an active bass. So in the 60s, Alembic was making basses. They were sort of doing it, they were doing an active thing where you kind of had to have some special inputs in it. And Phil Lesh was playing it, Stanley Clarke was playing it. And they were like a battery powered bass that had a lot of different tones that you can essentially pull out of it. But I think that needed kind of a special cable for it. And again, this isn't a video on the history of everything, just giving you a brief kind of overview of it. But in the mid-70s, I think 76 to be exact, the Music Man bass came out. That was with Leo Fender's involvement in that too. And that was really the first active bass. And that, I believe, at its inception had a 2-band active preamp in it. So you'd put a 9-volt battery in the back of the bass. You'd have a volume knob. And rather than having the tone knob that I described on a passive bass, you had like a 2-band and later a 3-band EQ that allowed you to boost or cut certain frequencies. Those frequencies would be bass, treble, and mid-range, or bass and treble at one point. So what that adds for the bass player is a certain level of flexibility that you have rather than going back to your amp and tweaking it. On the fly, you're at the front of the stage, you got your foot up on the monitor like a rock star, and you need to add a little bit of bass because the room's giving you a certain thing. You can do that. You need to cut a little bit of bass. You can do that. Same with treble, same with mid-range. So in the case of this Deluxe active and passive J bass, you have a volume knob, you have a pickup selector, then you have treble and bass cut or boost. Then you have mid-range cut or boost. So for just a quick example of sort of what can happen with that tonally, I'll show you. So here's everything set flat. There's detents on this particular bass, which means there's kind of a notch there, and it just kind of stops whenever you get to that middle point. They all do that. So everything flat in active mode, meaning this switch is up in this particular case. Here's the sound. You'll instantly hear that much brighter than the P bass. That has a little bit to do with the pickups, but also we do have active electronics essentially on. Now, as we would boost certain things, I'm going to boost a little bit of treble on it. You're going to hear a little bit of brightness come out. We can cut treble out of that too. And we can add bass. We can cut bass. And so on and so forth with mid-range. Now, in this particular bass, we can activate just passive. So we can flip between active and passive. A nice added feature. And in the case of this particular bass, you do not have tone control now. All you have is volume and pickup selecting. So these are inactive. You no longer have a passive tone control. So it kind of is what it is. It kind of limits you on the tone, the tone shaping you get out of the passive side of it. And then one more to kind of show you. Let me unplug this guy here. We have the brand new Fender Flea jazz bass. If you're anything like me, a product of the 90s, you grew up trying to play, and you're listening to a lot of Flea. I don't know anyone at my age range that was like learning to play in the 90s that wasn't into Flea. And a pillar of his tone was the active electronics in the aforementioned Music Man bass. So in this case, it's a little different than what we were dealing with the jazz bass there. Notice the pickup. This has one giant kind of Music Man style humbucker in it. But what we have here as a control, from a control perspective, you have a volume knob, bass, treble. So old school, like the 2-band EQ that was on the original Music Man. What's different here, though, there's no detent or middle position here. These are what's called a boost-only preamp. So you got volume, and then this is all the way back. So now I'm going to play. This bass is essentially set at flat when all the way, quote-unquote, off position. So. Now, as we start to engage the active electronics in it, we'll do treble first, because I think that's kind of what the tone's lacking at this point. Add a little bit of that, you'll hear the brightness come out right away. Put a little more on it. And then we'll add some bass. So this is an example of a boost-only preamp in it. Still very active, and yeah, I mean, totally useful in certain musical situations. So that comes to the question, what's right or what's wrong? What's best for you? I can't answer that. It takes a little bit of trial and error. Like I said, I'm a product of the 90s when I grew up, kind of learning how to play. Back then, everybody wanted to play active basses. My first bass was a Fender P bass. Quickly, I wanted nothing to do with it. I wanted active electronics. Everyone was playing that type of stuff. I loved adding bass. I love having the ability to really change the tone on the fly, on my instrument, not going back to my amp. As I got late into later stages of playing, I found that passive basses tended to work better for what I did. As I became more heavily influenced by, the James Jamerson style, Paul McCartney style, Sting, they were all using passive basses, and I've realized that they kind of worked really well for me with effects pedals. For every one of me, there's somebody out there that plays an active bass and has great results with it. So there really is no right or wrong answer to it. It's a matter of having the education on your, kind of finding out your own way about it. I would never say you have to play passive, you have to play active. There's great examples of monstrous players that do both. When recording, I find passive bass always gives an engineer what they are used to. It tends to sit well in a mix. Active basses, they may not be as familiar with it. Doesn't make it necessarily right or wrong. It's just, I know a lot of engineers really like, what a passive bass can do, because you can always change it afterwards. If you're adding a lot of bass, from your instrument, then those are things you have to take out later on. But there's a million great examples of awesome active bass players and bass sounds out there. So again, there's really no right or wrong. It's just a matter of knowing what works for you and what doesn't. And maybe have both. I have both. I own active basses, I own passive basses. So you're always kind of moving. You have to have a good ear as far as what you think is going to fit for a particular gig, for a particular song in the studio. And just kind of, again, know what works best for you. And that's always our goal here at Empire Music, is when you come into the shop, we want to sit down, we want to ask you a couple questions as far as how you play, what style of music you play, and what you want to get out of an instrument. So if you weren't familiar with active and passive, I'm sure a lot of you were. Hopefully this shed a little bit of light on it, answered just a few questions, or at least gave some suggestions as far as how to look. I look forward to having you guys, or some of you, in the store, or give me a call here, 412-343-5299. Check us out at empiremusiconline.com. Like us on Facebook, follow us on Instagram, hit subscribe on the YouTube channel. We greatly appreciate it. And hope to talk to you soon, and I hope I answered a few questions for you. Thanks a lot.